went into Spiral, another movie that this was your pick this week. So
yes, it was.
Before we kind of dive into it, this was originally a limited release 2019, released at festivals and stuff like that, and then released on Shudder in 2020. Directed by Kurtis David Harder. This is more of like a mystery thriller, not as much horror. So some of the stuff we usually talk about, like Best Kill and stuff like that, it's not really applicable for this one, but that's really what it was. There was no box office for this. There was no budget that I could find. The Shudder rating, this was a 4 out of 5 skulls.
Pretty good.
Not bad. And then on Rotten Tomatoes, this is where it got a little interesting. It was a 74 for the critics and a 41 for the audience. So it was a little bit of a divisive score. So want to kind of give a quick little rundown on what the movie is?
Yeah, definitely. So Aaron and his partner Malik and their daughter Kayla move into the suburbs of Illinois. Malik is a writer that works from home and soon starts to realize that something is off about their new neighborhood, specifically the neighbors.
Yeah, so let's get into the good. What did you find that you enjoyed with this?
I actually found a lot that I enjoyed with this movie. It was a quick little film, but the cinematography was great in this. All the shots they just meshed really well together. They were really well done, just really pretty, a lot of like nice landscape shots. The acting was also fairly good as well compared to some of the other movies we've watched for Shudder Sundays and movies we've been watching in general, Tubi films and stuff like that and whatnot, but...
Yeah, those indies and those B-rate horror movies, the acting is...
hit or miss sometimes.
Iffy at best, I'd say. That's for sure. But I agree, the cinematography for this was outstanding.
Yeah.
That was up there with a lot of the new age horror, that elevated horror. It had a lot of that, just great shots. That was definitely the shining moment of this. I did like the set design too. Basing it in the 90s was very nostalgic.
Yes.
It had a lot of, just stupid stuff. The wood paneling and stuff like that. The little VCR TVs.
Little details that I really liked, not to interrupt you, that I liked about that as well. When the daughter Kayla is doing her makeup in the mirror, it's the old, lash mascara with the pink tube and the green. Yeah. I know you might not know about that, but they did really good with the small details.
Yeah, they paid attention. And I guess I'll final my goods with the plot, because there was a lot that I enjoyed about the plot, but then that will segue into my bad as well. Because the plot also, I liked the basis of the plot. It feels like this was a great short story or a great 30-minute episode of some, horror-style TV show, because while the plot was fun and it had a good idea, they stretched it out far too long without giving us that much more. So I'll kick off what I didn't really enjoy with that is the plot in that sense.
Yes.
And the pacing was not great. The 90-minute runtime felt long. It really didn't feel... I was like, 90 minutes, cool. We're going to be in and out of this thing. But it really just...
It felt pretty long.
It felt a little bit longer than it was, because it was just... You kept thinking, surely they're going to do something here. This has to be a big plot point here. No, it just kind of slowly stretched out. It was fairly predictable. And the aspects of it that were meant to kind of cause confusion, because Malik, the character, is obviously suffering through PTSD of stuff that happened in his past. He takes medication for it, and he gets, quote-unquote, foggy at times. But the way they tried to, place that throughout just kind of paced it poorly, and it made it...
It made it a little more confusing than it should have been.
Yeah, and not... It wasn't confusing, it came off messy a little bit. I wasn't confused by it, but it was just kind of... didn't feel fully developed, really. But that's really all I had for the bad. The acting was good.
It was.
Everything else was pretty good, and it's disappointing for me that everything else was there except the story and the pacing, because we said, the sound design was amazing, the cinematography is awesome, and it was just a short story stretched for 90 minutes. So what did you not really enjoying as far as this stuff.
So it kind of goes hand in hand with what you had said as well. When I first started watching it, I was like, kind of a slow burn, might pay off, should pay off soon. Still isn't paying off. I'm like, all right, when's it going to happen? Finally starts to pick up a little bit, and I feel like as soon as it picked up, it just sped through everything.
Yeah.
There was just so many different aspects that I wanted to have more closure with, and different characters that I feel like didn't get their final conclusion and whatnot, and I feel like that's why I said it kind of left me confused, because in the sense of him, he had PTSD from, like you said, stuff that happened, I don't want to spoil too much, from his past, and kind of how it made it seem in the film that he kind of, which intertwines with the title, it's probably why they did it, that he started spiraling just in his mind and stuff like that, so you couldn't really tell if everything was being made up in his head or if this was actually really happening, which I usually like those kind of twists, but I wish they had gone a little bit more back to it and kind of explained a little bit more to make it better sense and not had rushed it so much when it was finally getting to the good stuff.
Yeah, so let's get into our top moment. Now, for me, I didn't have a, top moment, but I had a top thing that I enjoyed because they did it a couple times, and it was the figures in the dark. You know, they had about 3 really good shots where it's that if you're not paying attention, you're gonna miss it, and it's just, a character just slightly in the background. It reminds me a lot like Haunting a Hill House.
Yes,
where
that's how I feel. It's funny that you say that because that's exactly how I was like, this feels like so familiar, like not that a movie that I've watched, but like a show, like you were saying too.
So Haunting a Hill House, you'll notice that there's little characters in the background, and it's terrifying when you finally catch it. But if you're not looking there, you're not going to see it. There's one shot where there's 5 people outside the window. They're in dark cloaks, so you're not really paying attention because the main focus is the character in the middle of the screen. And then when you kind of look over his shoulder, you're like, oh, shit, there it is. And that happened, I think, 3 times throughout this movie. So that was my top moment, and again goes hand in hand with how well the cinematography was. So what's your top moment?
So I had 2 top moments. One being one of the specific scenes where the cloaked figure, where Aaron is in the main shot of the camera and kind of in the background. If you're not looking, and we had the living room lights really dark too, so you're like, if you're not just looking good enough, you can't see it, but there's a bunch of the cloaked, cult-like figures in the back, which was really just a really fun little thing. And then one more thing that was a really quick clip that I really, really liked. Malik is driving down the road trying to get back to the home, and he's kind of having hallucinations and whatnot, all this kind of stuff. If you guys watch the film, you'll see it explained. But on the side of the road, there's just a random hitchhiking torso. Kind of just a figure, kind of like a ghostly figure. And I just thought that was really creepy and kind of fun. I don't know what made me really like it, but how it was shot too was pretty cool. So let's get into our ratings then. So our fear and beer ratings, obviously, if you're new to this, our fear rating is how scary this is, and our beer rating is how much you enjoyed this movie. So what did you put for your fear rating for this? For my fear rating, I gave this a 2.5.
Okay. All right. I would give this, I was putting it at a 1.5. There really isn't much scares. There's a couple of those moments that I mentioned earlier. It's more tense than it is scary. Like I said, it's definitely more thriller than it is horror. So I really didn't find it scary per se. But our beer rating, how much did you enjoy this movie?
I gave this a 3 for the beer rating.
Okay.
I actually fairly enjoyed this a lot. If the ending was a little bit more panned out and the timing was better in the film, I think I would have rated it a little bit higher. But I really did enjoy this movie.
Yeah, I have this at a 2.5.
Okay.
Not too far
Fair
off.
enough.
It was smack dab in the middle. This is, unfortunately, the reason why I can see this wasn't as successful as it was is because that storyline. It was pretty basic. It was a good, fun plot, but it was just very basic. There was nothing that really pushed it over the edge for me. This felt like every other elevated horror indie style movie. It just it fell right in line with all the other ones. But that's
what I love, though. So that's probably why I liked it so much.
Which is fine. But it's just it's a movie that you've seen 1,000 times before. But I would say you should watch this based solely on just how great these shots were. The sound mixing was incredible. That's what really drove a lot of the tension was the sound design of this. Very bass heavy.
Yes.
Very paranoid. It has
anxiety ridden.
Yeah, it has. That's what really aggravated me about this movie is that it was so It had everything that it needed, and it just fumbled
Fell a
it a
little
little
flat.
bit with the pacing. That's what it was. It was the pacing that killed it, and it had everything else there for it.
It did.
But it was still enjoyable. So, Spiral on Shudder. You can go watch it now. And that's it. We'll be back next week. I'm Nick.
I'm Jamie.
Happy haunts.